Thank you so much. And this is the panel I was really looking forward to. Uh, you know, design as we see it. I myself am a designer by training before moving to the more business side of things. Is a very critical form, and it's been great that it's been recognized here at this stage, and we have a very interesting panel. As they said, unfortunately, Mr. Anjum Parvez had death in his family, so he couldn't make it. But Naresh, Naresh is one of the pioneers, we could say, in the space of design, development, urban thinking. And Venkatraman Associates, what I found in particular, they are doing exciting things, is getting involved with the whole startup space, seeing how they can stretch the boundaries. Uh, just a little bit more about Daisy, that smart cities have been the bedrock of the government's sort of thinking over the last few years. They've really been trying to bring technology at the forefront, and Cisco has been leading that whole thrust, and she's one of the main people in this whole space who's been leading the space on digital transformation. So, going to that, I'll just straight away jump into the questions, and I'll start with you, Naresh. Uh, where do you think, where do you think the role of technology should start?
This works.
Yeah, the first question would be, where do you think...
Say that again, sorry.
Yeah, where do you think the role of technology should start? Generally we say in the budgeting and planning space, which is a key component in the long-term sustainability of a project. So where do you usually start leveraging technology and data in the planning process or the execution process?
I would think right in the beginning, right? See, if you look at, today I'll actually talk a little bit about public projects, because that's where we see that in the private sector now that there is a fairly high rate of adoption of modern project management techniques as well as technology to make construction faster, better, cheaper. And it's always the conundrum of construction that every client wants the best possible quality at the cheapest possible cost in the fastest possible time. Right? This is the standard brief that we get from any client. But the dark side is that you can only control two of those factors. And the third is a function of market forces. So you take any two combination, you'll always find if you want it high quality and really quick, it's going to cost you a bomb. So, etc. But what happens in government is that I was just reading a Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation of the Government of India, and it says out of the 1,350 odd major projects going on in India right now, 700 have cost overruns, 900 are beyond time overruns, and less than 30% are on track. So clearly it is not the fact that the people in the government do not know what to do about this, but it is clearly a failure of technology's capacity, which is helping the private sector quite a lot. Now, most of my private sector projects are running roughly on time, except for land acquisition and sanctioning, of course, which is again a government function, unfortunately, tied up. But the physical execution is running almost like clockwork. Why is it that government is not able to adopt these modern technologies? And look at India as an overall statistic. We're about, what, $600 billion a year total construction, about $200 billion in construction, and about $400 billion in infrastructure in India every year. Less than 2 billion of that is connected to technology. For all the smart cities, for all the noise, for everything that you make, out of $600 billion. And we're going to spend about $800 billion every year for the next 10 years to improve the quality of infrastructure in India. As of today, less than $2 billion is the total size of the entire startup ecosystem in construction technology. I think this is a ridiculous amount. Really speaking, the penetration of tech into construction needs to be accelerated much more than it is now. And I think Brigade REAP is almost the first serious prop tech accelerator in the country. But you see, the mountain has to be climbed. The mountain is not going to come to Mama. We have to go and we have to find ways to push both private sector and government for faster technology adoption to make construction quality better.
So Naresh, I'll just follow it up with one question that, we all understand technology adoption is going really slow. Do you think that the government has a bigger role, that government could actually lead in adopting certain technologies that would then be also implemented by the private sector? Is there that factor of risk? Should we try to do that? Because right now it's happening the other way around. The private sector takes the risk and the government follows with a significant lag. So should we try to build this in?
You can see pockets of excellence in government where this is already happening. For instance, the implementation of the National Highways Authority projects of India is actually going tremendously well. They're doing almost like 20 kilometers a day, so which is starting to improve. There are pockets here and there, and if you look at digital infrastructure, I mean, let's not talk only about buildings today, because digital infrastructure has become part of our lives. The adoption of digital infrastructure by India is probably a success story for the world to replicate. And I think nowhere in the world internet is any cheaper. I think Daisy can back me up on this. The data rates are almost trivial. And what we all thought was a citizenship exercise, the famous Aadhaar card, actually turned out to be a United Payments Interface enabler, which is now, we can't think of a life anymore, just like you don't remember a typewriter or anything earlier, or rotary dial phones. You can't think of a life today without UPI stack, enabling, to such an extent that I was just joking to one of my friends yesterday that one of these people who come and ask you for money at traffic signals, and I said, I don't have money. She takes out her phone and shows me a Google Pay IRC code. I said, if it has reached this level, India has got digital right. So,
Definitely. That's a very interesting data point that you have. So Daisy, you work very closely with the government. You are involved in very large infrastructure projects. And we always talk about infrastructure design reform. Now, why is it so important, particularly in a country like India, where our infrastructure, even to be charitably said, is quite, insufficient for our needs by a long way?
So I think, Naresh, you said it spot on, right? There are spaces in India where the digital adoption is far ahead of the rest of the world. Our financial services sector, led by the government, right? To the point, setting up UPI and setting up the UPI interface is really what triggered the ecosystem around
including
it.
the vaccine.
Yeah.
Right,
So-
this is a classic success story.
Yeah, so I think there are spaces where digital adoption is really at the front end, if you look at any global benchmark. But I think the construction industry, or the real estate industry, or the infrastructure space, right, the core infrastructure space, I think the conversation around technology and particularly digital technology is still very much a bolt-on approach. And by that I mean what we're doing is what we call today smart. And that's a good place to start. There's nothing wrong with that. But bulk of what we call smart today is just bolting on digital interfaces on traditional infrastructure. It is not, to your point, at the core of the design. Right? You don't think about, I think I'm not qualified as most of you are in this room are to talk about it, but you talk about utilities as a core design principle, right? When you're looking at infrastructure. You look at water, you look at power, you look at other energy sources. It's time to look at digital also as a fourth utility, or technology as a fourth utility. And unfortunately, that's not the way that we're thinking about it today. So yes, there is a need for design reform, if you want to think about it. And therefore, the number of people who come to it, maybe people who work for Naresh, have to be not the normal, usual set of people, who may be architects, civil engineers, mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, but also data scientists who are comfortable with data models, IoT folks, etc., etc. Very complicated conversation, but that's what it takes if you want to really integrate physical and digital infrastructure. And if you have to have a really smart infrastructure conversation, that's what it will take.
So, as I understand it, then that, the role of the architect fundamentally changes. Technology becomes the backbone, at least as far as infrastructure is concerned. Do you think that the way we are approaching smart cities is, going in the right direction, or there is still, we are still bolting on this process after a certain level of traditional things are being done? What I mean by this is that should first digital infrastructure or data analysis be the core, so that changes the role of the architect fundamentally? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, so I think you're basically saying what's holding us up, right? What are 2-3 big rocks to get right? So I think the first one is interoperability of systems, because anything smart by design means that you're depending on the power of data and intelligence coming from that data to make better decisions, whether it's about a space, whether it's about a building, whether it's about a city. Unfortunately for us, and that's how we build systems, and I think the minister talked about silos. We build systems in silos. Even in a building, all of the systems in a building are generating data in silos. So the first big rock to solve for, or a big pillar to solve for, is the whole interoperability of systems in any space, including in smart cities, right? The second conversation is data. And data is something that maybe people in construction are not comfortable with, but you have to get comfortable, because data residency, data ownership, data guardianship, data sharing, the trust that comes along with it is what leads to this intelligence, the smartness, the better decision making, etc., which is what cities are also aiming for, right? And the last piece is, if there is data, then here's another really curveball from the technology space. There's also the consideration around cyber, because a lot of the hacks in today's world are not happening from IT systems. They're happening from systems which construction companies know and work with better. Surveillance, access, chiller systems, so on and so forth, right? So not only is data happening, but the trust aspect of this data is also a third point. And the fourth one is the siloed conversation. How do you build structures and consortiums and committees, if I have to use the word committee, to solve for problems across, in smart cities, for example, right? The utilities folks are doing their own projects, the transport folks are doing their own projects, the cops are doing their own projects, the mayor is trying to build a smart city in the middle of all this, the municipal corporation is trying to do something in the middle of all this. So unless we dramatically, technology is one piece, but unless we rethink the process piece of this also, and this is what we've been advocating for the last 8+ years, we've been working in the city space in India as well. Can we wait for everything to get solved before getting started? No, this is always a conundrum when we're trying to solve problems at scale. But
So if I understand correctly, that our biggest constraint in smart cities is the interpolarity of data.
absolutely.
Yeah. So which is where I think you're doing a lot of work on the Internet of Things, which seamlessly move data across.
Yeah. So the setting up of platforms, and frankly, the government, to your point about the government's vision on this, right? The government and academia as well. So there is right here in our backyard in the Indian Institute of Science, there is a project on urban observatory, right? The concept of urban data, bringing together urban data from different sources and putting it, think about it as a data lake where all of this data will reside. And anybody, any startup or anybody in the ecosystem who wants to build a use case on top of this data will be shared, because it's really the data that belongs to India as a nation. So this data will have ownership and residency will be with the government, but other parties can build smart use cases, including all of the startups who are here can access that. So there is this thinking about an urban data observatory, which Minister Puri's department is thinking about. But that is also a space that real estate developers can contribute to and also access data and information and systems and ecosystems from.
No, definitely, and that's something that might require some rethought of our data laws, because of that. What that also opens up this whole question of, Naresh, that maybe you could talk, that now we are talking about urban planning in a very different way. till now it's been very reactionary, the conventional town planning schemes. But if you look at what happens in real life is that the planning follows the development. The development is way ahead of the track. So what sort of this data repository, how could we really leverage it, do you think, in terms of an urban space, at a planning level? Because, when you look at even infrastructure or large private projects, they are done in a certain manner right now. Do you think some fundamental change related to data could help in that?
There is a bright side and a dark side to your question, right? So, about 2 years back, what Daisy pointed out, this whole siloing of data, like Bangalore is run by 9 major agencies, okay, including one elected one and 9 parastatals, which are the bus services, the electricity, the water, the debt, various things, the fire, and so on and so forth. Every single one of them is generating mountains of data every day. And they all sit in silos and they don't talk to each other. What is the physical result of this problem? What you see every morning, right? The guy comes and tars your road today. Tomorrow morning, the water supply guy comes and digs it up. Because they don't share data within each other. Now, I have been trying to work on this interoperability and proposed a project to the government of Karnataka 2 years ago, thinking, this sounds like motherhood and apple pie type of answer, right? Of course you need data interoperability. It's obvious. And we also think that from a technological perspective, this is easy to do. We know how to do it. We have the tools to do it. It's quite possible. So we proposed a huge project actually right behind this site in an old industrial area, saying that let's set up a Bangalore City Observatory, which is accessible all data feeds from all parastatals. Totally close to about 26 agencies interfere with Bangalore every time. 9 daily, some weekly, some at a policy level, etc., etc. And none of them talk to each other. So we mapped the whole ecosystem of how a city like this is managed and proposed a center to put this. And the government in principle approved it. Till then the government wrote a letter to every single parastatal saying, we are setting up this, please share the data. Total silence. So then I said, what's wrong? I mean, this sounds like the right thing to do. Why is everybody keeping quiet? Then I started inquiring, why is it there is resistance to? See, there is a private sector solution to design. And I disagree with you, technology is at the heart of construction. Design is always at the heart of construction and infrastructure. Design enabled by technology is what is lacking. And design doesn't mean design a building. You can design corporate structures. Today, if you Google the word architect in LinkedIn, I get every other result except the guys who design buildings. No? All the computer guys call themselves architects. You only get computer guys like maybe lead Cisco design architect. That's what you call the guy, right, who designs. Because chip design is very similar to, or system design is very similar to building design. You need foundation, you need superstructure, you need finishes, you need to make it look good, all that stuff. Exactly what we do, they do it. But what happens is that, unfortunately for us in India, there is no private sector solution to corruption and to bad governance structures, like colonial inherited governance structures, some feudal structures which we still operate in. This was the reason they don't want to share the data, because everything will become, the best antiseptic in the world is sunlight, right? The best disinfectant in the world. If you put if you merge the data infrastructure, all the data of the city becomes visible to everyone. And that is not necessarily a correct outcome unless you solve the more systemic difficulties in the way government, nobody wants to acknowledge the elephant in the room, or rather the 5 elephants always in every government room, but this is the real issue. Some departments in the government, the digital side has solved it, the National Highway Authorities has solved it, and there are many others. For instance, the power infrastructure of India. Have you noticed it is dramatically improving year on year? The distribution is still murder. That's because of poor distribution networks. But the actual generation of power, actually we are excess now. We can start exporting power. How is it that the government is so asymmetric in its knowledge economy? And because of these two things that I mentioned, the governance part can be fixed. The other big C, I don't know. It's not only an India problem. I'm not trying to diss India, but it's all over the planet, this in different degrees. But slowly, but surely, I think we are not going backwards at least. There is a definite push to make this more and more transparent. As the minister also pointed out, the more people get, I cannot also understand why more architects and engineers. See, it's very easy now in India to build within 4 walls of a compound. You can, today I would say architecture in India is a 9 on 10, the high quality buildings, right? I mean, look at a place like where we are sitting right now. If you ignore the majority of brown faces in the room, we could be sitting anywhere in any city in the world. All you have to do to know that you're in India is step outside this complex, and your foot will go straight into a ditch with running water, sewage. So that is a systemic failure which is not being addressed correctly in our governance structures. But more and more people ask for this. Only then that we can make our outdoors of India as good as our indoors. I think that is important for government to start recognizing it. The minister, I think the central minister also spoke about the same thing this morning, that unless there is a concerted push by industry and professionals wanting to work with government, maybe initially at a pro bono level, and whatever projects I have been able to do with multi-stakeholder influences in the city are becoming icons for the city, and people start loving it. Once the people want it, the government will do it.
So what if I were to take a step back, and this question is for both of you, that, our key is lack of urban data. But if we say that, let's not look at only the government.
Can I correct you there?
Yes.
We have too much urban data. And it is not interoperable. Each one is in its own format. Every department has got, the amount of data that is available in government is incredible. Daisy can back me up. I'm sure.
Yeah.
No,
they don't talk to each other. They won't part with it, and they won't give it to you.
No, I'm not saying data, like individually they have it. But like you said, the pool, we don't have a common pool. So what if academia and the private sector were to go about it? And, this is also directed to you, because a lot of data that you generate through your Internet of Things, what if we could set up a platform where other data generations, like, maybe an Ola, an Uber, a Swiggy, all of that generate very granular data could also become part of the pool.
So that is actually the philosophy behind Mahua's IUDX project, right? They are essentially saying, so the way that the vision of the government is really good. The government is saying that in our federated structure, states will build smart cities. They may be broken, but they will do, depending on whatever use cases are important to each city, they will prioritize what those use cases are, and so each city will come up smart in itself. That data will flow to a central data lake, which is the urban exchange data of India. That urban exchange data will be used not just for decision making in India, but it will also be used for data exchange with other countries. And to your point, yes, maybe an Ola, any other startup which works in real estate, who's looking at the outside environment, outside of buildings, can build use cases accessing this data. The thing is, the data in cities belongs to the nation, Dhaval. So it cannot be, unless there is a platform set up by the government. The government is a custodian of that citizen. It's citizens' data. It's your and my data. It's systemic data that belongs to the city, the state, the country. So there has to be a platform. There has to be rules around data sharing, right? Who's the owner? Who's the custodian? Who is it okay to share that data with? What can the person who's receiving that data do with that data? For example, if this building wants to open up, let's say it has free parking. Simplest example, right? Parking in Bangalore is a nightmare. Brigade in this building has got 1,000 parking lots which are not being used from 11 to 4. If when I'm on the road, can access the fact that I'm coming to this locality, there are 1,000 parking spaces here in Brigade available. Brigade needs to advertise that to the to the
Aggregator, maybe.
aggregator, to an aggregator, or maybe to the city. Maybe
Yep.
the city BBMP has a parking map of the city, and that's what most cities do, by the way. This is not out of the realm of possibility, right? In Jaipur, when we did a pilot to showcase this, we could very well do it. But to the point, we have systems of parking which are manually managed, outside environment, inside environments. They also don't speak to each other. So you go to a public parking space, there can be an overflow to a private parking space in that area. That just doesn't happen today, right? The problem is data. Who owns it? Who can use it? What the trust levels around it? What the monetization models are? Who gets what for their effort? These are the types of questions to answer, really.
Does it come back to a governance model saying that, if you had more of a city government, like, again, Naresh, please, comment on this, because if you had a stronger city government level controlling all of it, decisions could be faster or outcomes could be optimized. Is that one of the challenges in India, just our structure of governance?
City governments in India are emasculated completely. Sorry to use the wrong word, but what is happening is the capital of the state is usually in the same place as the government of the state sits in capital cities. The state runs the city.
Exactly.
The corporation, really speaking, has mostly ceremonial role to play and maybe extremely local governance. But most of the major decisions, city politics, see the world over, and it's a political problem because world over, the mayor of a big city usually becomes the prime minister of the country.
Yes.
So it's a very dangerous position to give away. Like in India, it will become the next chief minister will be whoever becomes the executive mayor of Bangalore. Right now, it's a ceremonial mayor. If you take a city like Bombay, forget Bangalore for a change. Bombay has a municipal budget of 44,000 crore. Okay, who presents the budget to the Bombay Municipal Corporation? The administrator, not the politician. No, not an elected politician. It is always why is that? The administrator reports to the chief secretary of the state, who in turn reports to the chief minister. So the power, the economic power of a large city is somehow the state does not feel comfortable enough to hand it over to the local. We have a 74th amendment where it says all these functions must be managed by you, urban local body. It's actually a constitutional amendment, not followed at all. It's in the breach. So unless this switch happens, where the city is treated like a functioning organic entity who is capable of managing itself and its money and its function. Otherwise, what will happen is the city is just seen as a money-generating device, which can be then used in rural areas to gain votes, which is spent outside the city. That is not a sustainable model. I think the government has recognized this, and there is a change happening. I don't know whether it will happen in our lifetime, and we will see all this change, but I can see definitely, slowly but surely, the balance of power is now starting to move to city governments rather than state governments.
Yes, I think there are a lot of organizations, particularly in Bangalore, civil service organizations they are taking.
Bangalore has the highest amount of civic activities per square kilometer of any city in the world. You trip, you will fall into the arms of a waiting civic activist. So it's like, I just counted the other day, there are more than 3,800 RWAs. Can you believe in Bombay there are less than 900? Bangalore has 3,800 RWAs, and everyone has a point of view. The new election for the BBMP, which will happen sometime now, much delayed for the past 2.5 years, is going to see the RWA presidents and secretaries becoming corporators. I'm waiting for that to happen.
That would
be a dramatic shift in what will happen, because now we have 243 wards. Even if about 30 or 40 of them go to RWA, Resident Welfare Association heads, you see what happens to Bangalore city. It will dramatically change the governance model, which is why the government is also not calling the election that quickly. If you notice, it's getting delayed and delayed. Now there is some electoral fraud going on. One excuse or the other. I don't know sometimes whether these are reasons to. So also there is a problem of proportionate representation, right? There are 28 MLAs in Bangalore and 243 wards, corporators in the city. The MLA's work is to make laws. But in the absence of a corporator, they have now become the one for every, the population of Bangalore is 120, about 120 lakh. I'm sorry, yeah, about 1.2 crore or so. So if you divide that by 243, that means every 50,000 people have one guy. That is, how can one person talk to 50,000 people at a civic concern? So it is clearly unsustainable and it will change now. And the amount of, what do you call it, like we also have all the tech companies here, we know data science, we know how to model the city. And you notice that in the recent floods also, before the government could even react, 20 guys have put up videos explaining why it happened with complex terrain models. Where did they get that data from? With complex terrain models showing exactly why water is flowing where and so on and so forth. Nobody has a solution, but we all know how to analyze the problem.
No, thank you for a very candid viewpoint on this. Now, there's one question that, comes to mind, that we all now understand the key role technology plays. But apart from that, apart from, of course, governance that we discussed, are there any other key catalysts that could be there which could, help speed up this transformation or could make cities fundamentally better from grounds up? Because now when we talk about cities, we are not talking about urban. We are talking about this really complex organization that, there is data involved. There are so many other things to consider. Climate has become so important. So what could be the other catalysts that would, help us speed up this transformation or, bring in a change much faster?
I think there's an overarching concern around sustainability, right? Of course, the government has signed the net zero by 2070 plan. Corporations have all become, corporations have become more responsible, conscious of this necessity to do what you're doing with sustainability in mind. As individuals, we've become more concerned about what the world holds for our future. And, just a little bit of a optimization on what Naresh said. I think there will always be this tug between urban revenue generation and rural care abouts, because for the foreseeable future, it's only going to get worse. Currently, 63% of our GDP comes from cities. Invest India says by 2030, it will be 70%. So this push-pull that we will generate money in the cities and have to distribute it towards rural areas will probably not go away. Not go away completely, right? So some balance, yes, but unnecessarily so. Coming back to the sustainability conversation, I think there are two things. One is sustainability, which will push individual effort, activism perhaps, corporate effort and government effort all in the direction of making cities with an outcome of sustainability and quality of living better, take a really hard crack at the problem. The other is why we are all here today, right? Innovation and the pace of innovation. We are, depending on the quarter, the second largest startup capital in the world or the third largest startup capital in the world. And startups are actually, we have our own accelerator inside Cisco as well, and they are not shy. Maybe it's the age group of many of the founders. They are not shy of taking on hard problems, looking for really unique problems to solve, including problems in the public arena, right? The IODX conversation, etc., is also emerging from the demand from people who think they have a viable idea that can solve problems at scale. So I think the innovation ecosystem emerging in India, the consciousness around really things are at a breaking point. Like today morning I was looking at Google. It said I could get here anywhere from 1 hour 7 minutes to 2 hour 40 minutes for a 45-minute panel discussion. I think we are all coming to the level of our patience limits. We don't want to live this way. So both the consciousness around sustainability, a better quality of living, and the innovation ecosystem will spur, I think, a change, a much needed change, force us to address some of the hard issues. Naresh, you can add.
I really think the buzzword for what we go ahead now, I think all major companies have now started adopting these ESG goals, which is environment, sustainability, governance. We are noticing that there's no point doing the first two if there's no governance model on top of it to make this happen. And from what you pointed out, the innovation ecosystem will only work if it ticks all three boxes. Yeah, otherwise, otherwise it's just going to be people talking on seminars like this and nothing will happen. So, really speaking, there's no point paying lip service to this anymore. As a group, as a citizen, as an individual, as a city, I think it's time we stood up and told the political leadership, if you want our vote, then you do what we want. A mandate doesn't mean they do what they want. A mandate for a political party is to do what we want. I think that fundamental correction in political understanding must happen, and that will only happen if all of us raise a mass leaders listen to the masses. That's why they're called mass leaders. So it's not enough if one and two of us go and talk. 50 of us go and talk, any politician will listen. And let's do that more and more.
So I get this loud and clear that it is the governance which concerns you the most.
100%.
So, before bringing this conversation to a close, are there any other points that you would, which I would have missed or not thought of, you would like to bring up, highlight? Because this has been a very interesting conversation. We've moved, from the realm of just pure data technology to see that how everything is interconnected. And we'll have to look at much more holistic solutions for adoption.
But I just want to stress on what Naresh said, right? This is not a good to have conversation anymore. And so, anything which is, we have this tendency of saying business results, measure it in hard facts. ESG goals, they're good to have, we'll try our best, right? There's no culture of excellence around that. We need a similar hard-coded culture of excellence that we have on business side, on the ESG side as well, and hard metrics there. And we have, I can give you a Cisco example, right? We are all building owners in this room, or we build buildings. And we can say we have a brownfield building, so we can't do anything much about it. But at Cisco, we've run around 60 projects in energy over the last 5 years. And that's led to an avoidance of 29 gigawatt of power and 24,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide emissions. Because as a building owner, you have to know that 30% of carbon emissions in this country comes from buildings. If you're building buildings, if you own buildings, and you don't have a goal around this, let's not sit around and talk about it, right?
Okay, maybe I'll end the conversation and they're trying to tell us to wrap it up. So sometimes it's good to understand and go back to fundamental Indian philosophy to understand how to deal with the problem. Right now we've had enough of fossil fuel era planning techniques imported from the West. The whole concept of saying downtown and suburbs is an American idea, it's not an Indian idea. We should stop saying things like downtown and everything. In India is a multi-nucleated urban system. Like, for instance, this complex creates an ecosystem around it. It's got nothing to do with MG Road. So we have to learn that. So there are 5 fundamental town planning principles coming from our philosophy. They call the Panchabhutas or the Panchatatvas, which is air, water, space, for energy, etc. Right? Each of these sounds like philosophy, but just convert philosophy, like what Daisy was pointing out, to metrics. What is the air quality of the city in 2047? In 2047, we will be 100 years of independence. Let's have a vision. I'm not saying it's possible to do it today, or maybe a shorter vision for 10 years. Can we define the air quality of the city saying 2.5 mm particulate matter cannot exceed 20? Today it is 214 in Bangalore. Highest pollution recorded in the last 1 month is today. And we have to have this session today. So technology is available to tell us how much, but we do not know what is the standard. Can we define water quality that 120 liters of water is available per person per day? Once you define the metric of a Panchabhuta, which is one of the tattvas of 5 tattvas of elements of anything that makes up matter, then it is possible to work to a goal, and all decision making will be subservient whether those goals are achieved. And stupid projects don't come up which create further carbon
Excesses.
Yeah, excesses. So all you have to do is sometimes go back to our roots of our own philosophy and stop relying on Western certifications and Western ideas which don't apply to India at all.
Thank you so much. I think we are just we've already run out of time. So I'd like to thank both Naresh and Daisy for a very enlightening conversation, which I hope could have run a bit more. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We would just request you to please stay back. We are open for a few questions. Would somebody from the audience, we'll just take a couple of questions. Please raise your hand. We'll just have the mic come to you. Thank you. Please be seated, sir. Yeah, you can be seated.
Hi, Naresh. Keval here. I am from Mumbai, and you were talking about Bangalore and Mumbai a lot of times. Just one thing to tell you is that all what you said, it hits us all, very hard and solid. The only thing is that to change this, you were talking about bureaucracy, you were talking about the political system, how RWAs are growing, momentums and stuff like that. Don't you think, you being an architect, if UPSC had an option of architecture, urban planning, because most of the bureaucrats, what they do is actually they run cities, right? They plan cities, they run cities, they manage the cities. Don't you think, because I have been taking this up from the Mumbai side, I am a developer, architect and urban planner myself. I've been taking this up with COA, with ITPI. Why not UPSC has architecture, urban planning, urban design as a subject where qualified people like you and others can contribute to, participate into UPSC, qualify and run the cities in a better way than what they are today? Over to you.
There are some moves already in that direction. There is something called the Indian Institute of Human Settlements, which is awarding a degree in urban practice. There are many people who are starting this. From a government recruitment point of view, government is on a recruitment freeze. For instance, the last town planner of Bangalore was appointed in 1986. There is no town planner appointed after that. So the guys who are still in the system, they have no idea that something called CAD exists or GIS exists. So at what level are you going to start? So maybe the answer is not to create more bureaucracy, is to find ways in which lateral. For instance, I am very happy to quit my job and join government if they let me. They won't, like, Niti Aayog already has announced a lateral hiring policy. I'm very happy to go and do it, but I can't be running after them, right? The government should reach out and say, would you come and work with us? And create a fixed term with fixed responsibilities. They did that with the Aadhaar card, with Nilekani and a few others too. This must happen to urban India also. You cannot, there are many architects like me and many engineers like me who would definitely spend, I think, the last quarter of our lives doing some nation building. But the government has to make the first move and come up with an open, clear and concise policy how we can do it. Mere education and recruiting people into the bureaucracy is not going to solve the problem, because they'll all be very young. And you need slight gray hair to understand the complexity of a city.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's Jyoti here from Christ University.
I can't see you. Sorry.
Hi all. So 2 questions, which is little, troubling in the smart design and planning. The first question would be, how are we planning to target the tier 2 and tier 3 cities of India? Are we really looking on to the design planning, the urban designing? And how are we looking for the academicians and the upcoming architects, engineers, or the data scientists? The second question is, are we really taking care of the data with regard to the cyber security, with regard to the data designed for architecture and urban designing? And what is the role of geospatial analytics playing a major in smart designing? So the question is for Daisy and Naresh, if you could add.
I'll answer the first one.
Thank you.
The second one.
Yeah, so it's geospatial analytics is already being used. And to the point Naresh was making, a lot more in the private sector for very unique. Ideally, when it was built, thinking was that it would actually most impact the way cities were run and governed. In smart cities also it is being used a lot. It's being used for interesting use cases in agriculture, logistics, etc., etc. So there are a bunch of use cases so tech adoption is not a problem. We have got people doing it at the highest levels of excellence in India also. In terms of the tier 2, tier 3 cities, from a mission mode, the government's projects around smart cities does not differentiate between large cities and smaller cities. In fact, in the terms of the scope of any smart city project in its covering the entire city, the smaller cities are better off because the smart city projects in metros likely so, constrained by budget, constrained by implementation complexity, is limited to 5 roads in 2 kilometers, etc. So if you tell a citizen of Bangalore, we are also a smart city, I'll probably turn around and ask, where, right? So the smaller cities are, at least the citizen is able to see the use case in smaller cities better than in larger metros. But the government's program does not discriminate between tier 2, tier 3 cities in terms of implementation.
Yeah, just add to that, saying that maybe it's time to, the word smart city has now become synonymous with bolt-on technology to archaic city systems. So maybe it's time to change the narrative, and what the smart city also does is very tech heavy. So I think maybe time to change that word to maybe intelligent and inclusive cities. That includes all components of the population and not just people who have access to high technology. That's one. Second thing, long ago, doctors, I don't know whether it's still a practice, that before you got your doctor degree, you had to go spend 1 year in the rural areas as compulsory service. I've written to the government saying do the same thing to architects and engineers also. Go to tier 2, tier 3 towns and villages. Only then will you understand the real India. And then only you are allowed to get your BArch or whatever degree certificate, unless you show that is possible. And only then will that intelligence go to, all the architects want to stay in Bangalore because this is where the money is and this is where the people want luxury homes and so on, and it's easy to get sucked into that. To solve real problems, you got to be there.
But it's the other side of it also, Naresh. I'm not talking from an architecture standpoint, but the apprenticeship program of the government, right? Which is, if you do it in the good intent, it's essentially asking companies who operate in the tech space, and more broadly, but that tech space is where it's happening to some degree, to adopt engineers who are coming out of tier 3, tier 4 environments in India, bring them into environments. So they bring the knowledge of the place where they grew up, but they also are able to take this back, maybe in the world of hybrid working, maybe in the startups they have become a part of. They're able to take this back to the environments where to their hometowns, right? So sort of expose them to highest level of expertise and send them back again, of course not push them back, but send them back again potentially because they want to. Many of them want to go back and work in that environment. So that the apprenticeship program for those of us who are pursuing it, pursue it not as a tick box, but with the real intent of changing, creating an ecosystem in a tier 3 or a tier 4 who will advocate for change.